Thank you, Moshe. Right. Bernie, starting it? That's starting, okay. Okay, good morning. So I'll just announce our sponsorships. So the Talmud Torah sponsor for the month, Avram and Shane D. Kelman, with the hope and prayer that this past Tisha B'Av, or future Tisha B'Av, will be a Chag filled with joy in the eternal Beis HaMikdash. The week of learning is sponsored by Akiva Andrews in honor of his wife, Dr. Karen Andrews' academic appointment as a lecturer at Hebrew University, and by Ira Miriam Grossman in the merit of a refuah shlema for all those in need. The day of learning is sponsored by David and Susan Clyde in memory of David's father, Chaim Ben Shalom Zalman Zal. Our learning should be in Aliyah for his neshama. And Daf Yomi Perek sponsors Jeffrey and Sherry Venick and Stephen and Holly Venick in memory of their father, Herman Venick, Chani Yisrael Ben Ruvain Zal. Herman was a beloved husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and longtime pillar of our Kehillah. May our collective learning serve as an aliyah for his neshama. Okay, so today's daf is daf ches in Mesachas Eruvin, and we are going to be picking up 7 lines down Amar Rabbah. So what we were discussing yesterday was the concept where you have a mavui that opens up to an area that's either a rechava or a chatzer that's wider than it. So we described it yesterday as a T. And then at the top of the T, there's a pirza that wall came down and opened onto a different Rishus Harabim. So initially we thought it was Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, and we said that Rav was concerned about Mefulosh, the fact that you could stand there and see straight through. And ultimately we decided that it was not a Machlokes between Rav and Shmuel, and that they're actually both in agreement. Or we actually don't know that Shmuel's involved at all. There was a concern when Rav Yehuda said something that we assumed it must have been in the name of Shmuel instead of his Rebbe Rav, because, I'm sorry, looks like this is on mute. I apologize if it seems the system was on mute. Okay, so I'll start again very briefly. So we were dealing with yesterday with a mavoi. The mavoi opens up into either a chatzer or a rechava. A chatzer is an occupied area. A rechava is something that is not used really, so it's not considered to be inhabited. And then there was further a break from there into another Rishus Harabim. And so we had the thought that Rav was concerned about Mefulosh, the fact that you're standing at the bottom here, you could look straight through the mavoi and you could walk straight through the mavoi, through the chatzer or rechava, and then get out in another Rishus Harabim. And whether that would make it like Mefulosh, ultimately we decided that that was not the primary concern here, and that what was going on here was as follows: that Rav, that this could go even like Rav, it didn't have to be Machlokes, and the fact that Rav paskin that you could not carry in the mavoi was because there was no eruv between the mavoi and the chatzer, and therefore because there was no eruv between the mavoi and the chatzer, that this was something that was fully open to a makom that's asur, and we talked about the fact that therefore you can't carry on the mavoi. But Rav would agree that if there was an eruv between the two, if there had been an eruv between the mavoi and the chatzer, then in fact you would be able to carry. So this is an eruv issue, not a mefulosh issue. Now what about the fact that Rabbi Yehuda paskined that you don't need to do anything? That was because the case Rabbi Yehuda was addressing was a rechava. And a rechava as an uninhabited area is something that did not require an eruv. So again, if the primary issue that we were dealing with, the case of rechava and chatzer looked the same in terms of physical structure, the difference was is it a used chatzer or a non-used rechava? So since a non-used rechava doesn't require an eruv, and the entire issue here was one of eruv and not one of mefulosh, so therefore that's why Rabbi Yehuda said they did not need to make any adjustment. But there does not have to be any disagreement between Rabbi Yehuda's halacha, which he said on Zayin Amud Aleph, and the halacha of Rav, which we said on Zayin Amud Beis. Okay, so now we're gonna slightly change that. So we had said that this was an eruv issue, was not a mefulosh issue. But picks up the Gemara 7 lines down. Amar Rabbah Hada Amrit LaEmtza Rechava Mutter. So he's picking up on, we said yesterday that Rav Yosef explained that the reason we're not worried about mefulosh is why? Because you have your mavui, and then you hit that T part that goes wider to the right and left. So as you're looking at the mavui, you see the mavui ends, and then there's a broader area, which is the Chatzar or Rechava. That's clearly a different area. And then there's the opening to Rishus Harabim. So we were not worried about Mufulash. But Rabbah says, not so fast. Hada Amrit La'amsa Rechava Mutter, this that we said, that as long as you have this T-shaped and you see that it's off to the side, so that's true, it's important to see that space, but that's not enough. Lo Amran Elazeh Shelo Keneged Zeh. That, nonetheless, we do have some concern about Mufulash, that if you're standing at the bottom here and you could see straight through from one Rishus Harabim to another, even though it goes through a Rechava, even though that T area that goes to the right and left shows you that there's a interruption, at the end of the day you have something that's open at bottom and top to a Rishus Harabim. So Rabbah says that's going to be a problem. So it only works if there is, you have your mavui leads into the Rechava or Chatzar, and then slightly off to the side, right or left, you're going to have the opening to the second Rishus Harabim. So you do not have a straight line from one Rishus Harabim to the other. If you were to have a straight line from one Rishus Harabim to the other, says Rabbah, that would be a problem, and you would not be able to carry. So basically, we're reintroducing this concept of Mufulash. We talked about it being an Erev issue. Now we're adding back in the concept of it being Mufulash. So it continues there. He says, Avol zeh keneged zeh aser. But if it would be straight, it would be aser. So now, what does it mean, though? When Rav said his halacha, he says, Mavoi shenifritz b'melua, that if you have a mavoi that's fully open lechatzer to a chatzer, v'nifritz a chatzer kenegdo, and it says opposite that, the chatzer has a broken wall to the Rishus Harabim. That seems to be saying you have a straight line. So Rashi explains that when it says kenegdo, just means the wall that's opposite, but nonetheless you have to go like so. Okay, now, so says the Gemara, Amar Rav Mesharshia. Rav Mesharshia. So now we have put two limitations on this halacha. One is that you have to have this T-shaped so that you see that there's an opening to right and left. That we learned yesterday. But now we're adding on top of that, you cannot have a straight line from one Rishus Harabim to the other. It has to be that there's some switch. Now we're going to add another one, which is when we said that as long as you have the T and you have the non-direct openings between the Rishus Harabims, it's mutter, but we have another qualification. Lo amran ela rechava derabim. That only works. The case of Rabbi Yehuda, where we're dealing with a rechava, which we said we don't need in Eruv, right, is only talking about a rechava that belongs to multiple people. Avo rechava di yachid, but if that rechava in the back, so you have your mavui and your rechava is on top, if that rechava belongs to a single individual, zimnin the mimlechala ubani la batim v'have le kamavi shekala letzidei rechava v'aser. So I'll read that again in a second once I explain the case. So we talked about this yesterday, that Rav Yosef introduced the idea that you need this T. You need to know that when you go in your mavui, you see a space to the right and left. But let's say there was only space to the right. So what would happen is you have your wall of your mavui, followed by the wall of the rechava. Now the rechava goes off to the right, so that Rav Yosef said is a problem because then you're seeing one straight wall. The left wall, in the example I'm saying, is the mavui wall followed by the rechava wall, and then that leads to where the Rishus Harabim is. So that's going to be a problem because this is what Rav Yosef said yesterday, because you have one straight line, and so you need a full T. It can't be an L like that. Okay, so now what Rav Mesharshi is introducing is, he's saying even if you have a T in this rechava, so it opens to the right and left, I'm concerned. What is he concerned? He's concerned that maybe if the rechava belongs to an individual, that individual is going to decide, you know what, I want to take advantage of real estate here. I'm going to take the left part of the T and I'm going to build houses. Now what's going to happen? You're going to have your wall of your mavui, and then you're going to have the wall of those houses, and that's going to put you back into the situation that Rav Yosef said is a problem. So if you have a linear wall that goes all the way, includes your mavui and your rechava, that's problematic. So Rav Mesharshi is saying, we're concerned that maybe the guy's going to build his house there, and we're going to end up with this line. So therefore, even before he builds it, even though we have a T, we're going to say you cannot carry unless it's a rechava of the rabbim. How does that help? Because I guess even in the times of Gemara, when you have a lot of people, you can't agree on things, and you have bureaucracy. It's not going to be so easy that you're going to build houses. But if one guy's there, he could choose to build his house. So Rav Misharshi is telling us that it has to be owned by Yachid. So now let me read it with that explanation. This that we said you could carry when you have the T and you have the non-direct line between the Rishus HaRabbims, we only said that when the Rechava belongs to multiple individuals. But if this back area belongs to one person, we're worried that it might happen that he'll change his mind. He'll build houses. You're going to have that straight line that Rav Yosef was worried about. It's a mavoi that then ends in the side of a rechava, and you have one straight line, v'aser, and therefore it's going to be aser. So we're going to end up here as follows: that if you have your mavoi followed by if it's a rechava, you don't need an eruv. If it's a chatzar, you do need an eruv, but you need three other qualifications. You need this T. You need to make sure that T cannot be changed by one individual, and you need to make sure that the openings between the Rishus HaRabbims have a turn so that it's not a direct straight line mefulosh from one Rishus HaRabbim to the other. Okay, so now ask the Gemara, where do we have this halachic concept that we're worried that an individual is going to change something, but the Rabbim aren't going to change something? Because we're saying an individual might choose to build houses, Rabbim aren't going to build a house. So we're going to say as follows, the Amar, because we have later in the Masechta on Daf Tzadi Tes, we say Ravin bar Rav Ada Amar Rav Yitzchak. Ravin bar Rav Abba said in the name of Yitzchak, Ma'isa b'mavoi echad, shetzida echad kol aliyam, v'tzida echad kol ashba. So here's the case: you have a Rishus HaRabbim like any other mavoi, like any other case, and you have a mavoi. A mavoi needs three walls for a regular mavoi, but this mavoi is interesting. Its three walls were crafted in three different ways. So let's call it your left wall. When you're standing in Rishus HaRabbim, your left wall was a garbage dump, and that garbage dump was more than 10 tefachim high. Okay, so that's one wall. On your right side was an embankment of a river or yam. That's actually machlokas in the poskim whether rivers apply. We'll see in a minute. But you have a body of water. Now some understand that the water itself is a mechitza, but we're going to go with the fact that as long as there is a sufficient incline, so the rule is eser b'soch arba. As long as the incline mislaket eser b'soch arba, which is the fact that as long as you can gather 10 in 4, so what does it mean? As long as if you're walking 4 amas, the slope is such that you're climbing 10 tfachim, so then that's going to be okay because that's a steep enough wall that it's considered a mechitza. Okay, so you have your Rishus HaRabbim. Your left side is a garbage dump, at least 10 tefachim tall. Your right side has the embankment of a river or a sea that is 10 tefachim tall. And in front of you are the chutzers that open up. So you have houses in front of you, garbage to your left, water to your right. Okay, that seems like a fine mavi. That was the case they had. But what happened? And they came in front of Rebbe and said, was this an acceptable mavi that you could just put up a lechi or korah and carry in it? V'lo amar ba lo heter v'lo yiser. Rebbe didn't want to say it's aser and he didn't want to say it's mutter. Why? Iser lo amar ba dehal kaima mechitzas. He didn't want to say it's aser because at the end of the day you have valid mechitzas here. Water is a mechitza, the embankment of water, garbage is a mechitza, houses are a mechitza. So he said at the end of the day you have 3 valid walls opening to Rishus HaRabbim. That looks and smells like a mavoi. But heter layamar, but he also didn't want to say that they could carry in it. Why? Because chashinan shemetinata ashba v'yala hayam sirton. Because they're worried that those walls on the right and left might not stick around. Why? Because the garbage dump, maybe they're going to clear out the garbage. And then people will be used to carrying because there was a mechitza of garbage and now it's not there anymore, but they're still going to carry, maybe because they don't realize it was the garbage that was the mechitza. And similarly, on the right side, you have the yam. But what happens, as is the nature, and this is why they argue about yam or rivers. Do rivers bring sediment the same way? But we won't get into it here. So the question is, the issue is, the nature of a yam is that the sediment or waves bring dirt, it accumulates, and you might end up with a much more gradual surface. So when you started, you had mislaket eser b'soch arba, which we had a steep enough incline. But now, as the dirt has come, it's become a much more gradual incline. And maybe that gradual incline doesn't make a wall. So again, people aren't going to realize that originally the reason you were able to carry is because there was garbage on your left, there was a steep wall on your right. Maybe it's going to happen, the garbage gets taken, maybe the wall is going to become less steep. So therefore, he didn't want to say mutter. So it continues, so we're looking for the source that we distinguish between Yachid and Rabbim. So far all we've seen is that we're worried about changes. But where do we see this Yachid or Rabbim thing? Continues the Gemara. Is that a reasonable concern that we have to make halachically, that we're concerned that your left wall is going to go away because someone's going to remove the garbage and it's no longer going to have the mechitza there? But wait, we had a Mishnah that is again there in Daf Tzadites later in our Masechta. Ashba b'reshus harabim gavoa yud tfachim. If you have a garbage dump that is at least 10 tfachim tall, chalon shal gaba zarkin lo b'Shabbos. That if someone has their window that's right next to that garbage dump, they can throw it out. Why? Because the garbage dump is a reshus yachid. His house is a reshus yachid. Why is the garbage dump a reshus yachid? Because it's 10 tfachim tall and presumably the dalad tfachim. Why? Dalad by dalad tfachim. Even if it wasn't dalad by dalad tfachim, it would be fine because it would be a makom patur. And because it's higher than 10 tfachim, less than dalad al dalad. Either way, you could throw from your reshus yachid to another reshus yachid or to a makom patur. So therefore, if someone is lucky enough to have a garbage dump right out their window, they just toss their garbage out. They don't have to worry about it. It's not a Shabbos issue. So therefore, the question is, why is it in one case Rebbe was concerned maybe the garbage is going to get taken away and then the wall's not going to be there? On the other hand, someone can always throw their garbage out. Why not say, wait, don't let him throw the garbage out the window because maybe someone's going to remove the garbage and then it's no longer Rishus HaYachid because it's only Rishus HaYachid because there's garbage piled up more than 10 tefachim. But if someone's going to move the garbage, he's going to be used to throwing his trash out the window. He's going to throw it out the window, and it's going to land on Rishus HaRabim, and he'll have thrown from Rishus Yachid to Rishus HaRabim. So why aren't we worried about that? So the answer is, Alma Shani Ben Ashbad the Rabim, Lashbad the Yachid, that it must be, the reason that we're worried in Rebbe's case that the garbage is going to get taken away is it must be that that garbage dump was owned by an individual, and that individual might decide, you know what, I'm sick of having garbage in my place, and he's going to clear it out, and now the wall of the mavoi is gone. On the other hand, when you have a garbage dump in Rishus HaRabim, presumably it belongs to the Rabbim. Things that belong to the Rabbim don't change that often, and therefore we're not concerned. So says the Gemara, Hachinami, Shani ben Rechava the Rabbim, Rechava the Yachid. So this is where we get this idea of Reb Misharshia, that Reb Misharshia says, even the T is going to be a problem if it's owned by an individual, because maybe he's going to put houses up on one side of the T and you'll be left with an L, and that would be a problem because you no longer see the distinction. It looks like one straight line from your mavi through your rechava. Okay, so now we had the case of Rebbe, where Rebbe said we're worried maybe the garbage gets taken away, or maybe the yam brings up sediment. So what about? So Gemara asked Rabbanan Mai. So that was Rebbe's concern. What did the rabbis paskin? What did the Rabbanim say? So Amar Rav Yosef by Rav Dimi. Rav Yosef Bar Rav Dimi says, Tana, we learned, v'chachamim osrim. And the chachamim, even though Rebbe was not prepared to say that it's asar or mutter, it's mutter because technically they're mechitzos, but asar because he might have said asar because he's worried people are they're gonna get taken away and people will still carry. The chachamim weren't so worried; they said asar. Amar Rav Nachman halacha k'devrei chachamim. Rav Nachman says that's in fact a halacha, that we're worried that it's going to get taken away, and therefore you cannot rely on this mavoi, on a mavoi that for one of its walls relies on either the sea or on a pile of garbage. Ikadarmi, there are others who say, Amr Rav Yosef Bar Rav Dimi, that Rav Yosef Bar Rav Dimi said, Tana, we learned from Chachamim Matirin, that the Chachamim said at the end of the day, the Rebbe was doubtful, and they said, no, it's okay because you have all three walls. To this, Amr Rav Nachman, Ein halacha k'devrei Chachamim. So Rav Nachman's consistent regardless of which version. He's saying, at the end of the day, Rebbe was uncertain, but I am certain that in fact you cannot rely on a garbage pile that could get taken away, or a sea that could bring up sediment and change the slope. Okay, Mireimar pasuk la lesura bu'uzle. So this is kind of unrelated, but it just has to do with this idea of the slope of the water changing. So what happened? That in Surah they had one or more mavois where you had your Rishus HaRabim, and then the mavoi comes off, and the back of the mavoi was the sea. So now, this might be like in Venice or somewhere like you'd have this. But what was the concern? The concern was, if you're relying on the sea to be your back mechitza, your third mechitza, what's going to happen if the slope of the water changes? And as we said before, it's not steep enough to be considered a mechitza. So then it's going to be a problem because you're carrying in this mavui relying that your third wall is the sea, and really the sea has shifted and it's no longer mechitza. So Meremar was actually worried about that. So therefore he set up pasikle, he separated the edge of the sea with uzli, he put up nets. So a net is a valid mechitza, and he put up a mechitza in the back as a safety precaution. So you see that there was a concern. Amar chashin Hashem yala yam sirtan, that there is in fact this concern that maybe the